Hi everyone. So this video, right, I will talk about worksheet 2 from chapter 5, okay? Chapter 5, which is on nutrition in humans. For this particular question, you can see that it's talking about glucose concentration. Okay, so let me talk about this graph first before we move on. So on the y-axis, right, you see that the glucose concentration is there, and on the x-axis, it is time. Okay, there is a unique mention here that there is digested food entering the ileum. And then you have A, which is showing the increase in glucose concentration happening in the hepatic vein of the liver. Okay, and finally you have B, that is showing that the glucose concentration has come down back to normal. This is of course inferred as normal. Okay, so basically, right, this graph shows the changes in glucose concentration in the hepatic vein. Okay, at point A, which I have described to you in wordings, that the glucose concentration in the hepatic vein is going up. At point B, the glucose concentration has gone down and is back to normal. Okay, so what does this all actually means? Before I go into the question, right, let me run through a little bit about theory. Okay, so this is the part where I have been talking about it pretty often, because I personally feel that it is a little bit confusing for most students. So let's talk about this first. Okay, so anything that goes into the alimentary canal, you can see the alimentary canal, in particular the small intestine lah, right? Because the small intestine is the one that is going to absorb food substances, correct? Digested food substances. So in the small intestine, that of course there is digestion, and what is more important is this absorption. So for glucose and amino acids, right? Let's be specific. For glucose and amino acids, they will be absorbed into the blood, and the blood to the liver. And so this vessel, right, is known as the hepatic portal vein. Okay, so the vessel known as hepatic portal vein will bring the absorbed glucose from the small intestine to the liver, where they are going to be assimilated. Okay, so what is assimilation? Assimilation generally means what the liver is going to do with the glucose, amino acids, and fats. Is the liver going to use them, or is the liver going to send them out, so on and so forth? Okay, so basically everything goes to the liver. For fats, right, they enter this way, okay, from the hepatic artery. But let's talk about the other two vessels first. After the liver receives glucose, right, the liver will use up the glucose for respiration. Okay, then it will send out the remaining glucose, right, to the rest of the body, mainly through the heart first, because it will exit the glucose via the hepatic vein. You will learn later, right, in chapter 6, that the function of all veins is to transport blood to the heart. The heart will then pump the blood to the rest of the body. So the first stop, right, of the hepatic vein is not the rest of the body, but actually the heart. After the heart pumps the blood to the rest of the body, right, some of the blood will go back to the liver again. And so the blood that is entering the liver, right, is via the hepatic artery blood vessel. So yes, you have blood vessel 1, which is called the hepatic portal vein. You have blood vessel 2, which is the hepatic vein. And you have blood vessel 3, which is the hepatic artery. Okay, so in terms of this particular chapter, so the liver will receive the glucose, example, it will use up the glucose, it will send all the glucose out to the rest of the body, and so over here, right, there will be an increase in glucose. Okay, then the rest of the body will use up all the glucose, right? And then the glucose that is remaining, right, the remaining glucose will go back to the liver again. And the remaining glucose that goes back to the liver, right, the liver will convert them for storage. So this is what it means, okay, about the liver as a in the process of assimilation. If you have more questions about this, please come and look for me again, okay? But first you need to read up first, all right? And you need to understand. If you can understand, good, awesome. But if you cannot, please come and look for me, all right? And so let's go back to the question, okay? So the first question, right, is to explain the glucose concentration in the following points, which is A and B. So the question is not to state, the question is not to describe, the question is to ask why the glucose concentration in A increase if you refer to the diagram. And why is the glucose concentration, right, goes back to normal, like normal. So the reason why, right, is not because of anything. It's because glucose, right, after it goes to the liver, it is transported out of the liver to the cells for respiration, to the rest of the body for respiration. Okay, this is the easiest answer because there are many functions for glucose. And one of the main functions of glucose is to respire, is to help in respiration. Then for B, right, they ask you why does the glucose go back to normal? Okay, in layman's term, why does the glucose decrease and end up back to normal again? Because after it goes back to the liver, right, excess glucose is converted to glycogen and stored in the liver and muscle cells. That is why the glucose level in the blood drops back to normal, because they are being kept in the organs. Okay, so the key for this question, right, is not to describe, it's actually to tell me why. All right, part B. Okay, sketch the graph of glucose concentration in the hepatic portal vein. So you are looking at the hepatic vein, but the question is asking about hepatic portal vein. So if you remember a little bit about theory, before the glucose increase in the hepatic vein, they must increase in the hepatic portal vein first, so that they can be transported to the liver, then the liver can send them out. Correct? So you see over here, right, this is where it's being digested, and so from here, right, it will start to increase because it's going to be absorbed into the hepatic vein. Hepatic portal vein. So you increase and then it will drop back again. Okay, it will drop back again. So this is the answer for part B. Okay, always label like this. And that's it. Alright, so for this question, you have to think a little bit deeper. And many of your answers are incorrect, but it is fine as long as you try. Okay, so this is part B. Part C, describe in terms of direction of blood flow. Okay, the direction of the flow of blood. How the hepatic portal vein is different from the hepatic vein. So basically, this question is asking for the hepatic portal vein, right, transport blood from where to where, and the hepatic vein transports blood from where to where because it's direction. So you can see in the answer, right, it is very straightforward. If you remember, of course, the hepatic portal vein transport blood from ileum to the liver. Small intestine also can. Alimentary canal also can. But you must mention the start and the end, okay, which I mentioned before in chapter 2, because it's about transporting from one region to another, like absorption like that. The hepatic vein, right, on the other hand, transports blood from the liver, the starting point, and this is where I wrote for many of your worksheet. It's not the rest of the body. It is actually supposed to be heart. Okay, so the hepatic vein transports blood from the liver to the heart. Full stop. This question is just like that. One transports blood from ileum to the liver. The other one transports blood from liver to the heart. Okay. The next question is slightly more challenging because of the phrasing in the question. So let me try to break it down for you. Okay, again, the command word is describe. Another difference. So this is a comparison question again. All right, it's asking you what's the difference in terms of the contents in the blood. So it's not about the direction of the blood. It is not about whatever. It is the contents in the blood that is between the hepatic portal vein and the hepatic vein. Okay, there are many differences, but there are three very, very obvious ones. Okay, so number one, right, is glucose. Hepatic portal vein has more glucose than hepatic vein, definitely. Okay, number two, hepatic portal vein has more amino acids than the hepatic vein. And number three, if you think about the functions of the liver, hepatic portal vein, right, has less urea than the hepatic vein. So these are the three very obvious substances in the blood that can be compared. Okay, so you can see, right, that this is a comparison answer. And my first line, right, the one that I'm taking right now, my first line of all, depending on what you choose, you need to choose two. I give you three. The first line is about the comparison. But there is a second command word, why. Why is there a difference? Okay, so this is where you have to use theory to try to explain. So glucose, is being used for cellular respiration in the liver to release energy. So that's the reason why when the glucose exit the liver, it is lesser because the liver already used up some. Okay, why is it that amino acids is lesser? Because the liver uses some amino acids for growth and repair, already been used up. And lastly, right, this one is opposite. The liver performs deamination, okay, which is the function of the liver. And because of the deamination of excess amino acids, the liver will send out more urea than normal through the hepatic vein. So that's why the hepatic vein has more urea than the hepatic portal vein. You can see in my answer, right, the second tick in all three examples is the explain. So for this question, right, you have to describe and then you have to explain, okay, 2 times or at least 1 time, depending on the marks. I can't remember. If it's 2 marks, then it is just one substance will do, okay, either one, glucose, amino acids, or urea, okay. But my comments from your question from your worksheet that I marked is that many of you are not answering according to what the question is asking for. And so, yeah, try to read deeper and try to have this experience of answering the question, which through time, I believe can be better. Okay, so that is my take for this particular question. The last one, okay, this is what we call a free response question, like an essay question, 5 marks. All right, describe the role played by the liver in carbohydrate metabolism after a meal. So the context, right, is after you eat. And after a meal, right, glucose level will only rise. You don't need to explain why glucose level will drop. Okay, so after a meal means glucose level will rise. In carbohydrate metabolism, right, you realize that glucose is being used. So this is the one that you need to answer first. Carbohydrate metabolism refers to what is glucose being used for. So this is worth 1 mark. Glucose is used for cellular respiration to release energy for cell activities. Okay, chapter 3, function of glucose. Then you talk about, right, the typical answer from the slides, from the notes on what happens after a meal, okay, where your blood glucose level will rise above normal. So what you're looking over here is actually all from the notes, okay? Let me run through them in sequence, and the sequence is very important. So the glucose level will increase above normal level after a meal. They will shoot up more than usual. Okay, this increase in normal levels, right, will cause the islets of Langerhans of the pancreas to produce this hormone known as insulin. After they produce the insulin, right, the insulin is travels by blood to the liver and muscle cells. You must write these two together, okay? And when they reach the liver and muscle cells, right, the insulin will stimulate the increase in cell permeability of the cells to absorb glucose faster. After they absorb glucose, right, they will convert the excess glucose into glycogen so that, that they will not escape out from the cell, and they are being stored in the liver and muscle cells. And because of this storage of glucose in the form of glycogen, right, the glucose level in the blood decreases back to normal. This is the model answer, okay? And this is extremely important when you answer free response question because it's quite a lot, and the sequence is important. So please go and study the typical theory and try to understand the concept, okay? Again, if you have questions regarding this worksheet, please come and look for me, all right? And then I'll try to explain to you in person. So that's it, okay? This is my take on worksheet 2 of chapter 5. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.